So I have had a lot of personal experiences recently, and I, as a trauma therapist, pretty regularly deal with grief and loss and life after those things. And what I have been wondering lately is, how do we live and grieve simultaneously? And that's what we're going to dive into today. So let's get right to it. Life after loss. And how do you do both? So, as always, I'm going to start with a story. A few weeks ago, my little baby nephew, who's not such a baby anymore, he's a full-grown man with a full-grown beard, got married. And it was a beautiful ceremony. And I absolutely love his now wife. And she's been part of our family for a long time and has ridden some roller coaster ups and downs with him. And just a steadfast, just an amazing young person who has done nothing but enhance our family. Here's where the grief part comes in. It was my nephew whose mom is the sister that I recently lost to, well, multiple things, ultimately to cancer, but she had multiple things throughout her life. She was a warrior woman. And so the day itself, like leading up to the day, we were a little, we're all in my family, as you might imagine, or at least my immediate family, my children and my husband. We do not shy away from grief. We do not pretend, or I should say we acknowledge the elephant in the room when things are happening. So in the weeks leading up to this wedding, we talked, here and there about how excited we were about it and also how sad it felt at the same time. And it occurred to me a couple times during this, and I didn't say this to them because they're too young everybody's too young, I think. But, I'm somebody who has lost both of my parents, one when I was very, very young and one when I was right in the beginning of sort of having an adult life. And I've also lost my sister, and I've lost some really close friends, and I've had some, what you might deem regular death and some really tragic, way too soon death. And so I know a thing or two about loss personally, and also I'm a trauma therapist, so I deal with that pretty regularly. But I'm constantly learning new things, especially about myself and grief. And one of the things that occurred to me during this lead up to the wedding was the phrase or the term bittersweet, and how I actually think maybe that word was invented for life after loss. Because my gosh, was that wedding sweet. There was so much goodness involved in it. There was so much beauty, and the two of them shone so well. My oldest kid was the celebrant, and she was remarkable. I mean, I'm biased, obviously, but I think she was remarkable. Her speech was beautiful. Everything about the day itself was magic, was exactly what you want a wedding to be. And my sister wasn't there. She didn't get to see her baby get married. She didn't get to see the fruits of her labor because we only lost her a little while ago. So she very much raised this young person to be the guy he is today. And, his wife knows her as well too. And so there was a lot of, her fingerprints were all over the day. And so this beautiful, wonderful, amazing milestone moment also had this hole in it that you just can't fill. He did a lovely song tribute. We all kind of went out and danced on the dance floor around him to this song that was very much his mom. And there were just other little things during the day that had her there, but they didn't make a big deal. They didn't make the day about her. They didn't really address it in a way that felt like it colored the day. And yet I know for sure every single one of her siblings, her husband, her kid, everybody felt her loss, felt her not being there. And so that's what I mean by bittersweet. And it occurred to me in my long life of losing parents and friends and everything else, I lost my dad very young. And so a lot of my life has had that bittersweet tone to it, that sense that something's missing from every milestone, from every big day, from every important special event. There's always been this like, oh, but dad's not here to see it. Dad won't be here to see it. I wonder what dad would have thought if he was here. I wonder if he was proud of me for doing this thing. And then since I had kids and lost my mom, there's been a lot of like this beautiful milestone thing, and my in-laws are there and it's so great and I'm so happy about it. And also I'm like, I really wish my mom could be here to see this. I wish my kids knew my mom the way they know their other grandparents. So there's just always this thing. growing up, and I'm going to get this wrong, so forgive me if you practice either one of these religions and I'm botching it. But we used to, I believe it was, I'm Catholic, but we had a Seder meal like in honor during the Lenten season. We would have a Seder and there would be a chair who I believe it's for Elijah. Again, probably totally botching this, so forgive me if you know the correctness and I don't have it right. But anyway, there would be a chair at the table that no one sat in, and it was for a missing whatever. Anyway, it always struck me as like, what a lovely thing to do. No one talked about it. No one said anything. No one acknowledged it. It was just this chair that was empty that was like, yeah, this family used to have another person at the dinner table with them, and now they're no longer here. But we put this chair here so that we always remember and we always honor it. And I found that I loved that tradition, that idea that we're going to acknowledge the life of this person, even as we go on living our own. We're going to acknowledge that they're missing from this moment, even though we are here doing our best and living our best. So that's kind of what I want to talk about today. The bittersweetness of life after loss. Because when I work with people, and quite honestly, when I talk to just anybody who has had any kind of loss in their life, people come to me as a therapist, and even when we're just chatting about it, their expectation is that they're going to feel better through therapy. And I want to talk, the first thing I want to ask them is, well, what does that mean to you? Because I think we can sometimes get caught in these expectations that like this tragic thing just happened to me, even if it doesn't feel tragic, even if it was, the end of a life or, a life well lived, and still it's tragic. And so this big, giant, tragic thing happened to me. And so I think if I do the work, I won't feel sad anymore. Often that's the expectation, is that I'm no longer going to feel sad about this loss in my life. And I don't want to be a Debbie Downer here, but the fact is that sadness, it never fully goes away. I heard recently, actually, in a class I'm taking on grief, that grief lives as long as love lasts. So, I'm sure you've heard before this idea that grief is just in place of the love that you had when you lose somebody. And that idea that like, it's going to last then as long as the love did. And so as long as I love my siblings, my parents, my whoever, my friends that I've lost, I'm going to have a bit of grief about not having them in my life anymore. And I also think that it's complicated in the way, and I'm hesitating to use the word because there's actually a definition for complicated grief, and that's not what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about just the process in general is complicated by the fact that there are multiple layers of it. I just talked about like a good, quote unquote, a good death, a non-tragic death, which, if somebody is older or has lived a full life or goes peacefully in the night or whatever the case, where it just doesn't feel as, as abrupt maybe, or as ill-timed as maybe a younger or a more traumatic loss is. Even when in those circumstances, there are, relationship dynamics that can sometimes need to be processed. What does your life look like now that this person's not here anymore? How was the end for you? There are multiple pieces and parts of grief and of loss that need to be processed, that might need to be. I always hesitate to use really exacts anytime I'm talking about grief, because it's not the same for everybody. This sort of universal sameness is that it takes time. And the sad part of it isn't something that you can fix or heal in a way that makes it go away completely, because grief lives as long as love lives. And so that idea that feeling better, quote unquote, means I'm not going to be sad about this thing anymore, that doesn't really work in that way. So the other sort of problem, I guess, or the other, barrier, I think sometimes, especially in the United States as I know it, and maybe a lot of the rest of the world too, is that we don't really get a time out to process the loss alone or singularly. We don't get the time out to process, mostly because, in those early days, depending on how you culturally handle death, there are things that happen that you're responsible for. And there's like detail work, and there's, paperwork, and there's government agencies, and there's all kinds of things that need to happen right after someone dies. And so oftentimes in those early days or weeks, you are focused on anything but the actual loss, because you're kind of in the muck of details of death. And that can last days, weeks, months, years, depending on how involved you are with the process. And what it can also do is then delay the actual work of grieving, because you've got a lot of really nice distractions. Not nice, terrible distractions, but distractions nonetheless. I know for me, my mother died when my youngest child was 4 months old. And I'll be honest, I think the active work of grieving my mother didn't start for like 5 years, 6 years. And it didn't really occur to me that that was true, because again, I was involved in the end of her life. I was involved in the care of her toward the end. I was involved of the details and stuff after, a lot of the estate kind of stuff after, planning and details and things like that. So I really thought like, oh, I'm in it. I'm really in it. And also I was raising 2 babies. I was living in my in-laws' house at the time. I was moving to a new home. I was changing jobs. Like, there's a lot of life events that happened that I didn't sort of realize it at the time, but looking back on it, served as distractions from my grief. I thought it meant I was just handling it well, but really what I was doing was not handling it at all. So going back to that, we don't get time out. We don't get to say, this terrible thing just happens to me and I need some time to process it, to think about it, to not just be in the details of taking care of it, but also for my own self to like sit with it and decide, how do I feel? How do I feel about what happened? How do I feel about what's next? How do I move forward? I'm sure there are cultures that do that and they do it beautifully and much better than we do, but I don't know anybody who gets that kind of time. If it happens when you're older, like I've heard stories of people who are maybe closer to retirement age or have been working long enough that they can take sabbaticals. And that's glorious. If you have that option to just kind of go, be in the woods somewhere and, or go be among people somewhere and take care of that grieving process, that's great. But I don't know very many people who get to do it that way. So our sort of job then is to live and grieve simultaneously, live at the same time we're grieving. And that's what I sort of want to address is how do you do that? And is it even possible? Can I live and grieve? And so I talked about a little bit when my mom died. My mom was diagnosed with cancer. Well, she was really diagnosed with cancer when I was in college, but then it came back when I was pregnant with my first child. And so my first pregnancy, there was chemotherapy and blah, 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 blah. She was okay during my first. We kind of swapped stories of, some strangely similar things that happen when you're in chemo and or carrying a baby in your body. So there's some interesting similarities that I never really knew about before she had this experience, but she lived for another 3 years, I guess, after that. So she was okay. Then it came back again in a really bizarre fashion. There was some, neurological activity. So there was a whole new batch of symptoms and things went really quickly toward the very end. And I had another baby in the meantime and we sold a house. My husband lost a job, got a job. We moved in with my in-laws to in between houses. So I had 2 babies and I was commuting back to the old town where we moved from because my in-laws' house was closer to the new house. I'm telling you all this just to paint a picture for you that there was a million things happening in my life at the time that she died. And so it was a bit chaotic. We were sharing a little bit of this in the car on the way home from this wedding with 2 of my kids. And I said something about, how, I saw this restaurant and this restaurant, I'm not going to name it because I don't want to give it a bad rap, but, I will always think of this restaurant and death because, my sister called the night that my mom died and was like, do you want to get something to eat? And all I could think about was, I got to get out of this house, this house of like, I moved into the basement and within 24 hours got the call that my mom was going to the hospital, for the end of days kind of thing. And I got these babies here and I'm responsible for this. And my in-laws are here. And even though I love and adore them, they're not my people in this moment because they aren't I wasn't born of them and grew up with them. And so in this moment, all they want is to do whatever they can to help me feel better. And it feels suffocating and I need to get out of here. I've never told them this, but they would understand, because when you are in those moments of grief, you don't know what you're going to need. And you don't know how you don't even really know what's best for you, quite honestly. The point is, my sister called me. She said, "Do you want to go out to eat?" I said, "Yes, let's go to this place. I know it's right up the street," because that was the thing that popped into my head. It wasn't particularly a place we liked or anything else. It was just, let's go to this place. And so we were talking about it in the car, and my kids thought it was so funny that I was like, I got to get out of here. And I said, no, it wasn't because of my in-laws. It wasn't because of anything. And they even said like, oh, you had to get away from us because they were the babies that were in the house at the time. And I was like, no, that even wasn't it. It was more like, I don't want to have to worry about anybody else in this moment. So I know that my in-laws will take care of my kids. I know that my husband will be home from wherever he was at the time. I can get out of here, and all I can do is go and eat this meal with my sister. I'm sure we didn't touch our food, but it just felt good to be like out in the world where no one was talking about it, where we could talk about it, but we didn't have to manage anybody else around us. And also, I could totally have seen that going a very different way, where we go out into public and we both are feeling like this was a terrible mistake. We wish we weren't out in public, because how can the world just be going on when this thing has just happened to us? How can people just be out eating when this thing has just happened to us? So there's this weird, like, you don't know what you're going to need until you need it. And then sometimes it's actually the wrong decision. The other thing is, I went right back to work almost immediately. I think I did a day off right after she passed away, so we could get like funeral arrangements taken care of and go and, do all the horrible detail things that come with saying goodbye and burying somebody and all of that. And then I went back to work. And I know the people at work were like, what in the world? But here's the thing. At that time, I was an 8th grade English teacher, and nothing brought me more peace and joy than 103 self-centered 8th graders, because they felt sorry for me because they were lovely people, but also they were 14. And who cares about anybody but yourself when you're 14? Like, you can't think farther than like, what am I doing tomorrow night with my friends when you're 14? And it was exactly what I needed. I needed to go be in a world where not everybody was focused on this tragic thing that just happened, or the grief, or the details of it. And I am very aware of other people who are like, I cannot go back to work. I can't face anybody. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to ask it. Somehow, miraculously, the people at my work, they just figured it out perfectly. I don't know if it was on purpose or if it was an accident or if I just got lucky. But, a couple of them said, I'm sorry. We're so sorry. Is there anything we can do? But for the most part, they were like, just get back to work. Do what you need to do. Take off if you need to take off, or show up if you need to show up. We got you. And it was exactly what I needed at the time. So the first thing in this, I always like to talk about, well, what do you need to do? How can you do it? How can you manage it? The first thing is in those early times of it just happened, is just kind of pay attention to yourself as much as you can, and do what feels okay. Nothing's going to feel good. And at least in my experience, nothing feels 100% right. And also, you can get really trapped in, what do I think other people need to do? Or what do I think other people think I should do? And so if you can just kind of go with what your gut tells you in the moment, that's going to go far to serve you in those early days. Awareness is really the first step in all of this stuff. How are you living, and how are you grieving? And what I mean by that is, I had said at the very top of this thing, and I didn't say it's to keep everybody from being hopeful, but, I said at the very top of this thing, the sadness part doesn't ever fully go away because you've still lost someone important to you. So, but that said, you can still live a very full, rich, and beautiful life. So the awareness part is, am I doing that? Am I able to feel sad, feel down, give myself some grace in those moments, and live a life that I feel okay about, good about on the best days, okay about on the other days? And I don't mean, are you able to show up for everybody else? Are you able to go back to work? Are you able to do the things that, the world expects you to do? What I mean is, are you able to enjoy the stuff of life that's still there and still good? Or are you totally overwhelmed by the loss so you can't enjoy any of it? And again, I'm not talking about in those first few days, weeks, even months those first few days, weeks, and even months, it's sometimes all you can do to just get up and put clothes on every day. That's okay. There is no timeline for acceptable or unacceptable behavior. Quite frankly, there's no unacceptable behavior. What I would love you to have is an awareness of your own needs, life, desires, sweetness, how you want to feel, and then be able to look at it and say, am I able to do that? Grief is really full of yes ands. I don't know if you're at all familiar with the improv world, but there's a whole thing where you do a yes and, like rather than a but or rather than a, an untruth, two things happen. It's yes and this other thing, this thing and this other thing. And they might be totally in opposition. I know we talk about that a lot here. I'm the queen of, holding to opposing truths, but that's probably because I've been doing it since I was 4. That your life can be really rich and beautiful and full of light and joy and horrible, tragic loss. You can have both things because you're still here and you're still alive. So you can have all the richness and beauty and still feel the sadness around what's not there or what isn't there anymore or what you don't have anymore. So the awareness piece is, do I have the and? Or am I getting in the way? Is my grief getting in the way of my life? And again, I don't mean in those first weeks, months, days. I mean, overall, if you're looking back, I told you, I think it took me like 5 years to actually actively grieve my mother. And partially that was because I was just doing the next right thing. And part of that is grieving. Like, let me just get up and do the next right thing. It took me 5 years to have some awareness of like, I have to do more for myself because I'm not even enjoying the stuff that's good. I'm just not even enjoying the beauty because I'm so busy either trying to distract myself from the sadness by not letting it in or just fighting it off. So all my energy is spent fighting off the sadness. And so I'm not even enjoying the good stuff. I'll tell you a little secret about myself. The awareness that I had in some ways was that I was really thinking that I was going to protect myself from any kind of future loss by closing myself off to relationships. So you would never know it. If you ever met me, you'd think like that woman has a million friends. And it's true. I do have a lot of friends. I have a lot of acquaintances. I know a lot of people. I'm very involved in things. I'm very active in things. I'm a community person. And for a really long time, everybody was not quite fully at arm's length, but maybe at like my bent arm's length. Because I thought, well, if I let them all the way in, then God, it's going to really hurt when they go. And this wasn't conscious, by the way. It's not like I was like calculating all of these things, but I realized it when I stepped back and said, like, I feel like I'm not really living my life. I feel like I'm not really experiencing the full joy of it because I'm busy, either distracted or like something's going on. When I stepped back to look, the awareness was, oh, I'm quote unquote protecting myself from future deaths by not really investing in these relationships, including the ones closest to me, my kids, my husband, my siblings, everybody. I sort of had this like, no, I'm just going to take care of my own self. And these people will orbit around me. But if I don't let them in, then it can't hurt so bad when they go. Well, so I'm laughing. If you can't see me, I'm laughing because of course that's not true. I love these people. It's going to hurt when they go. My sister just passed away and it hurt like hell when she did. And there's no protecting yourself from that. I even thought growing up, because I lost a parent at 4, I even thought that I spent most of my adult life preparing, quote unquote, to lose my mother. I was like, I'll be fine because I was fine when he died. So I'll be fine when she dies if I could just get to this. If I can just get to this. If she sees me graduate college, if she sees me get married, if she meets my first kid, if she whatever, I'll be fine. None of that was true. I wasn't fine. You're never fine. I always say to people, you're never old enough to lose your parent. Like it never feels like the right time to lose anybody. But somewhere in me, this protective piece was like, well, if we just prepare ourselves for the deaths, then it won't hurt as bad. And so in order to prepare myself for the deaths, I had to not love as deeply as I wanted to. Not great news for my husband, right? But that awareness piece, that understanding that this is what I do, has really changed a lot of things. And what it didn't change was that it didn't go away necessarily. Awareness isn't, I wish you could just be aware of something and be like, oh, I'm going to stop doing that. It's like, I'm going to eat beautifully because I know I'm supposed to. It's the same thing. Like, sure, maybe you're going to eat better because you know you're supposed to, but you're also still going to have ice cream sundaes every now and then. I think this is the same idea. I am aware that I have a tendency to keep people at a distance so that I'm not hurt when they leave my life. Not because of the losses I've experienced, because of some interpersonal stuff that's happened to me in my life. There's reasons for that. And I'm aware of it. It doesn't mean I never do it. It means I'm aware of it. So when I am doing it, I can catch myself and be like, whoa, 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 that's not how this is going to work. But so I can stop myself, and also I can apologize when necessary too, because I've been known to, cut myself off or stop hanging out or do whatever as a protective mechanism. And when I realize it, I can say, or, just be mean to my husband. That's definitely happened. And so I can apologize to him and kind of explain where I'm coming from, and not as an excuse, but as a way of him knowing like it has nothing to do with him. It's all my stuff I need to work out. And I have to keep taking care of myself in that moment too. Not only giving myself grace for it, but also like allowing in the grief, allowing the sadness, allowing myself to say, oh, I'm taking care of the little part of me that had these awful losses in her life. And that's okay too, to still want to protect that part. So once you have that awareness, well, then what do you do? For me, I had to figure out how to grieve. What do I need to be able to A, allow in the sadness, but B, keep the connection with the people that I lost, keep the memories of them as sweet ones, so that it helps me to remember, if I keep all these other people locked out or at arm's length, well, then I don't get any of the good stuff either. I wasn't prepared for my mother to die. I wasn't prepared to lose her. And it was tragic and sad. And also, I didn't keep her at arm's length. We had a beautiful relationship. We had an amazing friendship as we got older. We had, lots of conversations and I got to ask her lots of questions, and I made sure that we were tight so that I didn't regret our lives together, even when I lost her. And did it prepare me? No. But does it help me now to have those and stay connected to those memories and share her with my children in that way and talk about her and all of the things that remind me of the goodness of living, so that I'm not just protecting myself from loss. I'm instead choosing to live and absorb. So what do you need to be able to be connected to the people that you've lost, to be able to feel and remember the good stuff about them so that you're not holding yourself away from the rest? What do you need to allow in the sadness? Like I said, before this wedding, we kind of prepped a little bit. I reached out to my nephew and my brother-in-law a couple times. I don't know, maybe that wasn't the right thing to do for them. I thought maybe it was, again, the elephant in the room kind of thing, but also just sort of sharing the love that I have with them to say like, hey, I see you and I see what's going on and I'm feeling it too. I have heard of people who write emails to their lost loved ones as a way of like keeping them connected to the life that they're in. There was an episode once of, I think it was This American Life, a podcast that I listened to. And I don't remember why. I don't remember fully how it happened, but there's an old phone booth, I think, like an actual like booth where people would come and call their lost loved ones. I don't know. Maybe it was even after like a natural disaster or something where there was like that town lost a bunch of people. I don't remember. I'll look it up and see if I can link it here because it's a really beautiful episode. I was walking the dog, listening to it and like fully weeping in the middle of my neighborhood. So I felt bad for anybody who saw me, but hey, it happens. But the point is, people would come and use the phone to call their loved ones and sort of report on their lives and tell them and feel that connection to them. And I know I recommend that to clients all the time with journals or letters or anything that you want to say, good, bad, or indifferent to the people. I know as a kid growing up, anytime I had a milestone moment, I took the thing to my dad's gravesite. I left a graduation announcement. I left a picture of my confirmation, certificate. I left a wedding invitation on his gravesite. Like there was things that happened through my life that I shared with him in that way. I laid them sort of on his grave. I remember learning about Dia de los Muertos and the Mexican tradition, Day of the Dead in Mexico. We have All Souls Day here in the Catholic Church, but at least growing up, we didn't really do anything. Honestly, it was a day off after Halloween. That's what I remember it as a kid. And I remember as a kid being a little bit upset, like, well, it's All Souls Day. Like, why aren't we doing anything? Like, can we talk about the souls? Like, I really was desperate for it as a little kid. Like, let's talk about my dad. Let's honor him. And so then when I learned about the altars and the celebrations and the stuff that's associated with Dia de los Muertos, I was jealous. I was like, this is very, very cool. And I wish we did something like this here. And I wish I was part of it. And so then I kind of did my own little, co-opting of that culture. And like, I have my own ways now of like preparing an altar. I don't have the big full altar, and I don't even necessarily celebrate that day, but the idea that you could sort of communicate via these, put their favorite foods out, put their favorite things out, put favorite books and flowers and all of that. That was such a beautiful idea to me that I have adopted ways of that in my life now. I have a deck of cards, like an oracle deck. That's a Dia de los Muertos oracle deck. And so I occasionally, when I feel like talking to an ancestor, will pull out one of those cards that has a way of like communicating with them or asking them or whatever. But whatever the case, my point is there's a whole bunch of different ways to not just connect with the people that you've lost, but also honor that memory and that love and the goodness of that. And for me, at least, that has helped me then transition and know that I need to be mindful of the joy and the goodness that's currently in my life. So I don't get fully absorbed by the sadness because I don't want to miss out on the goodness of now, because missing out on the goodness of now is not helping me prepare for losing anybody at any time. There is no way to protect yourself from that kind of loss if it means you've just cut off the life that you're currently living. If I'm protective of myself by keeping everybody at arm's length, well, then I'm not enjoying what I have right in front of me. And that to me doesn't feel like it's honoring anybody that I've lost. So, I know that part of the reason for the sadness and the grief is because I lost something that was so beautiful. And so I really want to honor that by continuing to absorb the beauty now. I'm still here. So the way that I live, I feel like not only honors the people that I've lost, but also makes the love continue on. So I needed to know what I needed to do instead of, this like missing out piece. And I think once you have that awareness for yourself, what parts aren't working for me, what parts aren't okay, then you can step back and go, okay, well, how do I get more of what I need to live and grieve? And sometimes it's just allowing yourself the grace to acknowledge the sadness. I know so many people, myself included, I'm sure, in those early days where I was just, not even early days, in those years after where I was distracting myself with a million other things. I know so many people who try to push off the heaviness, the sadness, the grief of it by focusing on this. I'm going to stay positive. I'm going to stay here. I'm going to stay distracted. I'm going to stay busy. I'm going to stay whatever. And that's a coping mechanism for sure. But it isn't a coping mechanism that will last, that will keep it away forever. That sadness is coming for you, even if you don't feel it or don't want to feel it in the beginning. And so after my first few years of being really distracted, I found myself really, really sad. And I thought, oh, I think I know what this is. And so that awareness of I know what this is, how do I then allow in the grief? And what that looks like for me now is different. My mother, like, I understand that, again, a lot of the milestones for my own kids are going to have a little tinge of sadness to them. And I just accept that. And I don't let it be the thing of the event. There can be a tinge of sadness and still have it be a beautiful, wonderful moment in life that I absorb. This wedding, everything about it was amazing. And we missed her so much. Her presence, the lack of her presence was felt. And it was a beautiful, amazing, wonderful wedding. And we all felt really strongly about making it so for our nephew too. So having both of those things, giving yourself the grace to feel the stinky stuff and also allowing in the really good stuff so that you have a nice balance of both and you're not overwhelmed by one or the other at any given time. And what I mean by overwhelmed by the goodness is that you're pushing off the actual grieving, the actual loss, the actual sadness that comes from not having somebody as part of your life, because that can't last forever. I heard a really great metaphor, and I wish I could credit the person, I can't remember who said it, about pushing that sadness away, pushing that grief away is like when you are trying to hold a beach ball underwater and you hold it down. If you can see me right now, you hold it down with such strength and such pressure, it really takes a lot out of you. And when you lose your grip, which inevitably you will, because it's almost impossible to keep a wet, slick thing underwater, it shoots up in the air. Whereas if you just allow it to be there with you in the pool, occasionally you're going to bump into it now and again, and it's sort of annoying, but it's not explosive and changing the state of everything around it quite like it would if you were trying to keep it under and it pops up violently. So if you try to keep out the sadness, the grief, the real emotion that comes from loss, if you try to keep that out, it might overwhelm you at some point. It's not staying out forever. But if you allow room for it and also give yourself some space to enjoy the goodness, guilt-free, then those two things can exist together. Life is bittersweet. Just make sure you get a little bit of both. That's all I got for you today. Until next time, keep asking the good questions, and we will get curious together.